survey address to fill out for canning classes. I want to remind everyone, if you haven't picked up your fertilizer, please go by and get it tonight after we leave here. It's on the patio at Scott Christian Care. The full pallet is the one I would suggest you pulling from, because the one that's lower, it's got some damage on it, and you might have, if you don't have anything to put the fertilizer in, I would grab the other bags. But there's a clipboard out there. Just sign your name and put the number of bags you get. You can get up to 2, and they are 50-pound bags. So please go down there and get those. Yes?
I'll go up there right after and let it self-loading up their fertilizer on it.
Okay, if anybody needs help, Doug will help them get their fertilizer in. Trying to think what else I've missed. The survey is going to talk to you about canning. She's going to try to get an idea of what kind of canning classes, how many, so she can schedule her times and things like that. Am I missing anything? The harvest, the canning, and the fertilizer. Okay, and after you guys leave, we have some more corn for you. It's ambrosia and bodacious, so please feel free to get that. And how's everybody's gardens doing right now? Good, doing good. Everybody got planted? Yeah? All right. You guys keep sending me your pictures. I love those, and it helps me. I'll post them on the blog, and I just love those, and it inspires other gardeners as well as other communities. So if you guys don't mind, keep sending those. Tonight, Sean is going to talk to us about insects, good and bad.
A little bit of both.
But remember, if you guys have any questions, he'll answer them at the end. He's also going to talk to us a little bit about the cicadas. So in your mind, if you've got some questions to go with, he'll be glad to help you and answer them. All right, so we'll let Sean get started.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to turn that out so everyone can see what's going on. But my name is Sean Mullen. I'm the ag agent here in Scott County. I'm excited to be talking about insects. That's one where I have a degree in entomology and a degree in ag safety. So I am very much a jack of all trades, a master of none, but a knowledge of everything. So I'm going to talk a little bit about insects tonight. And on the paper it said beneficial insects, but as I started to go into it, it was just like, well, I can't really talk about one without talking about pests, then talk about this, and so it's kind of like scatterbrained. And so I apologize that in advance, but feel free to ask questions, and we'll kind of go from there. So first, jumping into beneficial insects, I figured I'd talk about the good. Go ahead and get you guys a little bit excited first before I start talking about pests and be like, ugh, kill it. So there are different kinds of beneficial insects. So you can think of popular ones like pollinators. Everyone's heard about pollinators, especially nowadays. But there's also the beneficial predators that help feed on the pests. You have the pests paralyzing, which Doug talked a little bit about last time, and we'll talk a little bit more about parasitizing insects. And then also insects that help with decomposing stuff, so we don't have a lot of just random sticks, food, everything else laying around. They help break it down and turn it into soil, which then can be used to grow new things. So I don't know if a lot of people have seen these pictures or not, but here's a picture. On the right is a normal breakfast, and then on the left is a breakfast without pollinators. And so you can see there's a lot of differences between the two. On the right, you have fresh fruit. The left, you don't. You don't have a jam. Don't have some nuts like almonds, more fruit juice, some of the creamers. And so there's a lot of things that pollinators help grow. And so it's one of those things where when you think about, let's go ahead and have some native habitat for pollinators, if you're interested in bees, there's a lot of ways to help bring in beneficials. So then you have pollinators, so you're not eating a very bland breakfast. So people talk a lot about bees being pollinators, which they are great pollinators. If you look at their big businesses where bees are transported all around the United States following different crops, but they aren't the only pollinator. And that's an important thing to remember. They like specific plants. If you go online, They're doing some research looking at different plants that honeybees are interested in, but a difference between bees and wasps, they collect pollen from plants, and that's how they get their proteins, versus wasps that go out and eat other insects. And so that's kind of one of the distinctions. And so in the pollen, there's all kinds of different amino acids, and so each bee requires different amino acids. So for example, honeybees might go to one plant looking for this amino acid, but a native bee, bumblebee, something like that, may not need that as much. And so that's one where it is not, you can't just plant one plant to be like, all right, everyone's good. Having diversity is very important to help with all pollinators. And so it's important to think about, bees are a big one everyone's heard about, but they aren't the only ones. And not only insects are pollinators too, but I focus on the insect side for tonight. But if you think about, there's bees, butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, and that's just, a tip of the iceberg. But there's a lot of different species that will pollinate plants. And again, they all pollinate different ones. If going back to bees, since that's a popular one to talk about, some bees have different strategies for collecting pollen. And some have buzz pollination, like bumblebees will go and they'll actually vibrate their wing muscles to help dislodge pollen. Honeybees don't do that. And so there's just some distinctions where, again, diversity is going to be something I keep talking about on and on all throughout tonight. That's one where it's just like, if you're trying to have a farm or eating food, you don't want to just have, one thing. Like, sure, I love ice cream, but if I eat ice cream nonstop all the time, at some point I'd be like, I wish I had some fruit, or I wish I had, whatever the case. And so jumping into the next one, predators. Beneficial predators are great, and as a gardening group, they're going to be great friends, because that's the one where they're going to go out, they're going to eat pests that you don't like, aphids, all kinds of other stuff that we'll talk about in a second. And so it's a great source of pest control. It's free, and you don't have to worry about putting chemicals out or any of these affecting the ecosystems. You're focusing on the interactions of the environment. And so you can order beneficial predators to release them. Like if you go online, you could probably find ladybugs, maybe praying mantises, all these things. And that's not a bad thing, but it may not have quite the effect that you're looking for. It may not be quite as successful, because you may have some pests, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, I think, but if there's no food there, they're gonna find food. And there might be food, in another person's yard, way away, and as they leave, like sure, they may have ate some things, but it's not going to control it. And so unless you want to just be throwing money into insects all the time, that may not be great. And you need to be careful, because they may not be native insects depending on what you buy. And so if you're introducing things to the environment, it may not have a great for the balance. And then it's important to know what is what. And so you may go out and be like, oh, the insect, I'm going to kill it, and it may be a beneficial insect that's actually helping you control your pests. If you go out and kill them, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. And so it's important to know insects. I know a lot of people are like, ooh, not sure about some, insects, spiders, all the creepy crawlies. But it's one where it's a really diverse animal group, and there's a lot of cool things that go in. They're very diverse. There are hundreds of thousands of known insects, and expected that there are many more that haven't been identified yet. And there's a lot of diversity within. You have everything from honeybees with what's called eusocial groups, or how they have their hives, where there's the female queen that lays all the eggs, and then the worker bees, which don't ever lay any young, but they work as a group to help pass on the genetics of the queen, to then having into solitary insects, into looking at urban pests, gardens. There's a lot of diversity there. And so I would challenge everyone here to, if they have a little bit of aversion to insects, to kind of, let your mind open a little bit. Read a little bit about them, and then that, as you know more, it might be a little bit, be like, oh wow, I didn't know that, that's cool. Then also thinking about some of the non-insect beneficial predators. And so thinking about spiders, mites, Also, yeah, all kinds of different things. Animals, like birds, little rodents. There's a lot of things that can help control pests. And so going in, and this is not going to be a comprehensive list. If it was a comprehensive list, I could go through, pages and pages, and then everyone would be bored to tears. But we're going to go ahead and cover some of the common beneficial garden insects. And so here are, just lady beetle. A lot of them, ladybug is a common name, and that's one thing where, as you go into looking at insects, you'll realize there's a name that's different in every area, and that's one of the, issues working with common names. Everyone calls things different. Just like we'll get into this again. I'm spoiling another part of the talk, but people call cicadas locusts, and that's not true. They're not actually locusts. So there's a little hint to the future. But anyway, so there's all kinds of different species within ladybugs, but they're great in the garden because they'll be feeding on a lot of the soft-bodied insects. Aphids are a big one, but they'll go through and both the adult and larvae will go ahead and feed on these pests. And a cool thing is that they're actually one of the state insects for Tennessee. And so that was a fun fact. There's actually 3 different state insects. There's the ladybug, the firefly, and the honeybee. And so I guess that's one where they just we can't decide, so we're just gonna throw them all out. Throw them all in. Going into ground beetles, and again, this is one where there's a lot of different ground beetles. You can see here on the top, the common name is a fiery searcher, versus down here where simple like a ground beetle is a common name, but there's a lot of diversity within this group, and they're ones where they're gonna be in the ground. Both the adults and larvae will feed on a lot of different insects, caterpillars, snails, not only insects, but snails, slugs, small insects going around. You'll have the tiger beetles, if you've ever walked, especially out in like a hiking trail, and you'll see this really flashy green insect, but if you move close to it, it'll dart away. That's a tiger beetle, and that's also a type of ground beetle. And they are very common around. So then lacewings, there's 2 different types of lacewings. There's the green lacewing and the brown lacewing. And so both of them are predatory insects, and they'll help control a lot of different things. Again, I'm going to be saying a lot of soft-bodied insects, aphids, whiteflies. There is a little bit of a difference between the 2. The brown lacewing adult feeds on insects. The green lacewing doesn't. Actually will go to flowers and feed on nectar. But both of the larvae forms will feed on insects. Praying mantis, this is a big one. A lot of people are like, oh, beneficial insect, praying mantis. And it is good at eating insects. A little too good sometimes. It will eat anything that moves in front of it. I don't know if you want to go online and search on YouTube for videos, you'll actually see praying mantises on bird feeders going for hummingbirds. It wasn't successful, but I guess they have a pretty, pretty full of themselves. They're like, oh, I can do this, I got this. But there's several different types in here. And so there's the Chinese mantis, which I believe is down here, and then the Carolina mantis. Both of them can have brown and green forms. The Chinese mantis is going to be larger, and then the Carolina mantis is generally brown. It can be green and smaller, but they're both predatory insects that can be beneficial. And then damsel bugs, and so you can see that's the damsel bug right here, and it's feeding on caterpillar right here. And so there's a lot of different kinds of damsel bugs. Come in all kinds of different colors, yellows, browns, grays. And they'll go ahead and, with insects, generally it can vary, but 1 to 2 broods each year, meaning that a lot of insects overwinter as an adults, or there's kind of 2 groups, adults or larvae eggs. And then when they come out, they'll go ahead and reproduce and have a few broods a year. Some have 1 a year, some have 2. Some used to have 1, have switched to 2. Like a good example is the southern pine beetle, which is going through, and if you go around Scott County, you'll see a lot of damage to pine trees. one of the issues is it's started to have multiple broods a year. And so that's one of the issues with the pest. But anyways, the adults will overwinter and they'll emerge in April, May. They feed on all kinds of different things, which we'll talk about in a second. Aphids, thrips, plant bugs, leafhoppers, tree hoppers, on and on. And so all of these are ones where a lot of these insects I'm talking about right now aren't very specific. They're kind of generalists. They'll feed on a lot of different pests. As we get into especially the parasitizing wasps and flies, they're ones where they're fairly targeted on a specific species. Assassin bugs. This is one where there's a lot of really cool assassin bugs. You can see right here is the assassin bug. They can come in all kinds of different colors. On the bottom, some people may have seen this before, a wheel bug. You can see it looks like there's a cog wheel on its back right here. And so it's really cool where if you look at insects, there'll be a lot of forms of cryptosis or hiding themselves. And so you can see that this is an example of cryptosis right here, where it's blending into the flowers, and they can ambush all kinds of different insects that come in. In general, they have narrow heads. They may be flattened, which you can see. This is fairly flat, and then also, it might be kind of hard to see in this picture, but that the thorax right here is flattened. And then all of them have piercing, sucking mouth parts, and so they won't, their mouth is pretty much a straw that they stick in insects and suck out all the juices. And so it might be a little bit morbid, but they are good insects helping out control pests. And so not only pests in the garden, but they also will feed on things like mosquitoes, some other things that are pests in a different way. So looking at parasitoids. And so parasitoids, there's two different groups. There's the endoparasitoids, and these are the ones where the larvae will live and develop inside the host. And there's ectoparasitoids, which are ones that are laid outside and then will feed on the insect from the outside. A lot of different species, and as I said, they're fairly specific on what they prey on. A good example is the Bracodiid wasp. If you're listened to our talk last month, you heard a little bit about this wasp. This is one that will affect tomato hornworms. And so you can see, again, here's more pictures of the tomato hornworm with then all these pieces of rice on it. And so these are the Bracodiid eggs. And as they hatch, they'll go inside of the caterpillar, feed on the caterpillar, and then come out wasps. And so if you see this in your garden, it's a good thing. Definitely leave it. But you can see that the wasp here is not very large. It's fairly small. And on a taconid, that's one where I've always been horrible with pronunciations when it comes to insects, so I apologize if you know how to pronounce it better. But here's a type of fly that is parasitoid, and there's different species that affect different species, but there's a lot of different ones around. And then also a wasp called the cicada killer. I don't know if you've seen, they're really large wasps that dwell on the ground, and they buzz around, and there's often a lot of people that get freaked out about these because they're huge and like, oh, it's a wasp, oh, it's gonna sting me, it's bad. But they're actually very docile, and that's one where you have to really try to get stung. You really have to work hard because they don't want to do it. That's not really their thing. They're solitary, and what they'll do is the female will go out and find a cicada, sting it, parasitize it, fly, drag it back to its den, pull it down while the cicada is still parasitized, still knocked out, sorry. Again, that's another one of those pronunciation things where I just get stuck, and so I apologize for that. Anyways, it'll be down there, and then the eggs will hatch and feed on the cicada while it's still knocked out. And so there's all kinds of different kinds. The first two I talked about before were the endo and parasitoids, and this is a form of ectoparasitoid.
They swarm on the ground.
And so they are solitary, so they might have nests in the same area, and so it might look like they're together, but they're each hole is one cicada killer. And they tend to do kind of group up, so it might be kind of confusing with that. But that's one where also with both bees and wasps, only the females can sting. Males can't sting because the stinger is actually a specialized form of a female part, the ovipositor. And so that's why if you, like, I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but beekeepers can pick up drones and do anything with them because their drones being the male bees, they can't do anything. They don't have stingers. So that's just a fun side bit there. So then looking into decomposers, and so that's one where there's kind of 3 different groups. Again, with insects, if you look at any one group, I could probably pull out dozens and dozens of species that go into it just because they're so diverse. But and there's the ones that will feed on the dead, dying plant tissue, ones that will feed on dead animals, then also ones that feed on feces, like if you've seen like dung beetles, putting the balls of dung around. And so there's a lot of different kinds, beetles, flies, a little bit of everything that can be decomposers. But these are ones that are important because if we didn't have decomposers in our environment, then we wouldn't have the recycling. We can't, then we just have a forest floor full of leaves and sticks and dead animals and everything. And so this way is one where they can go ahead and help turn it into soil, which then can be used to grow plants for us or trees and stuff out in the forest. And so talking a little bit now, those are a little bit dip into beneficials, but what's the pros to using them? And so it's easy. It's one where you don't have to go out there, you don't have to handpick every single pest off, you don't have to go out and maybe spray some non-synthetic chemicals out there. They do the work for you because they want to be fed. It doesn't require insecticides, and so with insecticides you can, that doesn't mean insecticides, organic growers would use insecticides. It's just they're synthetic or natural. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the different, like brief into organic pesticides, but all it means, a pesticide is pretty much something that's used to control insects or other pests. Better for the environment, you don't have to go out there and spray something all the time affecting more than just what you're spraying, but maybe affecting some native pollinators, ground insects. And then also, beneficials sometimes can be used effectively enough to control your pest population. And in a second, we'll talk about something called Integrated Pest Management, IPM. And so that's one where you can get into very deep into that, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how that could be used in your garden and how you can use that to help control pests and then have a successful garden year. And then it's a great time to go out and learn about insects. Know, okay, this is deemed a good insect. This is deemed a bad one. Again, it's insects like this are just like weeds, where some people may say, oh, that plant's a weed. And other might be like, oh wow, I want that in my garden, or I want this in my yard. And so insects can be very similar, where it's only a pest depending on if you decide it's a pest. And so some of the cons to using beneficial insects. And so that's one where they can be great to control, but they're a food source. The pest is a food source for the beneficial insect. And so sometimes the pests aren't controlled before they start to do a lot of damage to your plants. And so that's one where as you start to get more pests, you might have more beneficials come in, but then it's kind of that battle, which one's going to happen first? Are the pests going to be controlled before your plants are taken out, or not? And then, as I was saying, with buying insects and putting like a package of ladybugs on your property, it may work great, or they may decide, oh, I can't find any food, so I'm going to head over to the neighbors. I'm going to go across the road, down the ways, and so then you may be out. So it's one where it can be successful, but they may decide, all right, there's greener pastures on the other side. Then, especially with praying mantises, beneficials may decide, all right, well, there's a lot of other beneficial insects here that look tasty. I'm going to eat those. And so there could be some kind of interactions there, and could kind of, instead of helping control the pests, they may go off and do their own thing. And then having, it's a great way having beneficial insects to learn about insects. But you also kind of have to know, all right, what's what? And so it takes a little bit of that knowledge, figuring out, all right, this is a ladybug versus a Colorado beetle. Trying to figure out which one's good, which one's bad. And that's one of the reasons why insecticides, synthetic insecticides are used a lot, we want to have the most perfect vegetable or fruit out there. No blemishes, no little bite marks out of it. We want to have that perfect thing which you can put into a commercial. And so by not using that or you going organic, that's one where it's good to just kind of learn it's okay to have some stuff. All right, I'm going to cut around this. It doesn't actually hurt it. And so getting okay with having some little blemishes, nicks, or bites out of it isn't necessarily a bad thing. Though obviously with storage, it's going to use that stuff up first. And so some ways to attract beneficials to your garden. And so it's important to think about providing habitat. And with that, it's important to think about what kind of habitat is good for the insects you're trying to attract. And so it can be all kinds of different things with having some turf grass for some of the ground beetles. Thinking about having mulched beds, because that's a great place for insects to overwinter. Because instead of being exposed to all the harsh winters, if they kind of get into some of the nooks and crannies, then they kind of have a place to kind of lay low through the winter and then come out. And then that's when they may, depending on the species, lay some eggs and have the next generation come out. And then also thinking about having native plants, like some different flowers and such, planted on your property. They're ones where these insects, if they're native, have interacted with these native plants over time and may have good relationships with it. For example, if you think about the green lacewing, they're ones that are going to, in their adult form, feed on nectar, even though it's larvae that are going to be helping control pests. But if you have a lot of great habitat planting different flowers, native plants, then you can maybe attract those in and help have a food source for all stages of the insect. And so going into food, so having all these native plants are great, but you can go ahead and if you have all of your plants blooming in the spring, that's great for spring, but then come summer, fall, there's nothing there. And so this is also great for pollinators because if you have some food sources throughout the year, then they can go ahead and not have to go out searching for other sources. And so that's one where, as I was saying with the green lacewing, there are going to be some adults that feed on pollen and nectar. And so having these flowers may lead to having more larvae which feed on the pests in your garden. And then here, the Tennessee Smart Yards program, they have a great native plant database, and that's one where more than just flowers, they'll go through native plants to Tennessee with trees, shrubs, flowers, and I'll make sure to have the link sent to Rhonda so it's put out. But it's a great one where they'll have all this information going into different plants. You can select them and then talk about where in Tennessee were they natively distributed, having what kind of sun requirements, water requirements, all kinds of different stuff, so you can help you like, all right, that's a great native plant. Where is it best located in your yard? And then also, it's okay to be okay with weeds in your lawn. So some people want to have, perfect turf grass with nothing in it, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're okay with having dandelions, some clovers, all kinds of different little flowering plants in your lawn, then that's going to be a great source for pollinators, beneficial predators, all this. And so if you're okay with that, that's a great way to kind of two birds, one stone kind of thing, where you don't really have to do any work. You don't have to worry about trying to control all the dandelions, and then also you'll help give food for insects. And then providing water. And so this is one, especially beekeepers, honey beekeepers will go ahead and do this a lot, where just put some water out, because depending on where you're at, or if the time of year, maybe there's less moisture out there, we're going through a dry period, having a source of water for insects are great. That's one we'll, if you put it out, my guess is you'll probably find some bees and other stuff going to it and getting water. And so this is one where I'm not going to spend a lot of time on pests, because this is even more of a a challenge to walk through all the pests that could affect you, because it really depends on what you're growing and the first group, and they'll live in the soil and they'll affect like root systems and some tubers and stuff like that. And so they're early season, since a lot of insects will overwinter underground, because again, they're shielded from the harsh temperatures. They'll go ahead and be like, oh wow, there's all these great roots and things to feed on. And if they damage the roots early on, then that's going to affect your plants. Then you're not going to have a good crop. It's just going to set the plant back because they're not able to have all of the nutrients and water that they need to grow. And then there's also some pests that affect the foliage, pods, and fruits. And so that's just a fancy way to say pretty much everything above the ground. And so with soil pests, here's an example of a wireworm. And so on the left is its larvae form. You can see it's a little worm here, and then the adult, which is a beetle. And so that's one where several different groups, moths, butterflies, beetles, wasps, bees, ants, they all go through what's called holometabolism, which pretty much means a complete metamorphosis. So they'll go ahead and start out as a caterpillar worm. They'll go ahead and form a pupa, and then come out as their adult form, as like a beetle, butterfly. And so that's one where the complete metamorphosis, meaning complete change. The larvae doesn't look at all like their adult. And so the white grub, which are a lot of various things, could be Japanese beetle, June beetles, but they're the ones where if you're digging in your lawn, you've probably seen a white grub before. And so that's what they turn into.
Chickens love them.
Oh yeah, it's great. That's one where if you have some chickens, a lot of these pests that you have in your garden, they'll take care of. I know that I would go out and knock Japanese beetles into a cottage cheese container that was empty, shake them up so they're all rattled, and then go throw them in the chicken pen, and they'll just go crazy over it. So that's one where if you can think of kind of these interactions, one where you might as well, if you're getting rid of the pests, instead of just tossing them out somewhere, let your chickens get a little extra protein. But yeah, so this is one where if some people have started new gardens, including myself, if you've turned what used to be old grass turf into a garden, this is one where some of these white grubs, wireworms, may be a little bit of an issue, maybe not, but that's one where if you keep it from grass, then you'll, after a few years, this issue will get better and they'll get less and less. Various forms of maggots are fly larvae, which again, flies are also another form of holometabolism or complete metamorphosis. And so they'll go ahead and affect root systems and just kind of start to damage them, kill them, make them slimy, gross. And so some controls are to help make sure that the soil is not over wet, so then the plant's healthy, and then having dry soil helps. With insects, one of the insects' largest issues overall as a broad group is desiccating or losing too much water. Because if you think about an insect, they're not very heavy, but for their weight, there's a lot of surface area on an insect. And that might be, it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but they're not very heavy, but there's a lot of space on them. And so by having a lot of that surface area, they're prone to losing a lot of water through evaporation and other things. So that's why a lot of them have waxy coatings on their shell and other mechanisms to try and preserve water. Like if you think about caterpillar feces, like if you had a tomato hornworm or something, you'll see like little balls of frass, which is or poop. And if you look at it, it's very dry, and that's because there's a lot of biochemical processes within the insect to keep pulling more and more moisture out, so then they don't use more moisture than they need to. But a little bit of distraction there, but if you have the warm, dry soil, then that's going to make it harder and harder for these maggots to survive. And then also adding in some organic material in the fall, just go ahead and kind of, might seem kind of counterintuitive, but it is a way to help control maggots. And so looking at some cutworms, and so these are ones that will go ahead and cut the stem of your plant. And pretty much it just looks like someone went out there and just snapped your plant off. And so some ways to help control those. If you can find them, remove them. Otherwise, having physical barriers. And so if you can have like a little bit of like wire mesh around your stems, that will help prevent damage from cutworms. And so thrips. And so this is a cool one. If you can kind of see with the image here, the order of thrips is Thysanoptera, which means fringed wing. And I believe it's Greek. Fringed wing. And so if you look at the wings there, it looks like it has like little like feathery wings. And so that's just a little cool thing about it. But anyways, there are ones where they'll go ahead and they're piercing, sucking, and so they'll go ahead and feed on your plants, and then just overall kind of drain a little bit of your plant and help weaken it. And eventually, if they're large enough infestations, can cause a lot of damage. And so one way to do this, and this will work for a lot of other stuff, if you kind of clean up your yard. And so if you go ahead and maybe get a little bit busy during the summer, or like, oh wow, it's really hot, I don't really want to be out there. Think about clearing a lot of the debris and weeds around your yard, because that's going to be habitat for these insects. And so if you kind of help keep it clean around the garden, then you may reduce some of these populations. And so then aphids, you can see down here, with this plant, this poor plant has a lot of aphids on it. All these gray spots are aphids. And so there's all kinds of different species of them. Again, I feel like I'm a broken record with that, but because there's some insects that are so diverse, there's a lot of different species for these. And they'll again, they're piercing, sucking mouth parts. They'll just go on and start sucking a lot of the plant juice out. And so ways you can control this, you can have some beneficial insects like ladybugs, or a lot of other insects that eat soft-bodied insects like aphids. Or you can also go out and if you wash it with water, maybe take your hose and spray it down, you may help dislodge some of them and help control it. And so looking at some of the insects that are infesting the plant foliage, or pretty much eating stuff above the ground. And so tomato hornworm, which have heard a lot about now, but that's one where you may be like, well, why are we focusing so much on this? It's one that's easy to see, and then also it's really easy to see all the damage they do. If they have a chance to go out there and eat, they're going to decimate your tomatoes. And I'm a big fan of tomatoes, and that's one of my favorite things, to go out there and eat from the garden. And so some control methods, other than having beneficial insects, maybe having some parasitoids in your property, some things that you can control easier are hand picking them. They're another one where they're big, fat, juicy, and chickens will go crazy over them. Or you can just go and squash them, well, whatever the case is. But that's one where if you just kind of, they are really great at camouflaging in, or having cryptosis, like I said before, which is that being able to camouflage in the environment because of that green. If you start looking for other signs, maybe saying, all right, here's some damage, maybe here's some frass or caterpillar feces, and then you can see, oh, there's the hornworm. Just kind of go into detective mode and start figuring out, all right, here's all the different things, and that helps triangulate where the hornworm is. So there's a lot of different insects that are borers. You can see right here, boring inside a stem of the plant. You can have that with corn, squash, a lot of different stuff. And so those are ones where they can also transmit diseases that way, but what they're doing is, as they go through that stem, they're pretty much stunting that plant, because that's where all the nutrients and water transport through. And so it depends on the species, on controls. Some of them you can go ahead and, if you're careful, you might be able to remove them from the stalk. You can, depending on what they are, you might be able to inject something like BT into the plant. But in general, if you see them and the plant's dead or dying, that might be one to also remove the plant. So if you remove the insect from the area, then you're going to kind of stop it from reproducing and helping the problem just balloon up and grow way too much. So cucumber beetles. And so these are ones that will go ahead and feed on cucumbers, but one of the nasty things that they'll do is they'll actually transmit diseases to your squashes, your cucurbits. And so they're an important one. They're also fairly easy to see because they're flashy yellow with maybe stripes or dots on it. You can see there's a picture of both here. And so That's one where they'll also be pretty harsh on the plants early on. As they get larger, they may be able to handle it better. And so that's one where if you protect the seedlings from the cucumber beetles, having netting, screen protectors until they start to develop these runners. And then also, again, cleaning up weeds. If you help remove some of the habitat for these insects, then you're going to have a easier time controlling them because you're making it so they can't reproduce and grow crazy. That's one where people, talk about, breeding like rabbits, but insects are on a whole nother area where they can go ahead and have they can go ahead and explode very fast depending on the species. And so then squash bug, which is that's probably the largest bane of my existence when it comes to gardening. But this is one where you can see this brownish gray insect right here will go ahead and explode in population on all kinds of squashes, cucumbers, zucchini, pumpkins, watermelon, and they'll just suck your plant and then also help expose it to diseases. And then on the right here, you can see that's the eggs of the squash bug. And so that's one where if you start controlling them early and by going out and hand picking them, that again, if you go ahead and start removing the population, then they're gonna have a harder time reproducing. And so it's kind of one of those, prevention is key. Doing it early is better than waiting to be like, oh no, I have a problem. And so you can go ahead and hand pick the insects, or you can go ahead and if you find some of the leaf masses, then you can also help, you can rub them off or pluck the leaves, depending on how old your plant is. And then also, these are ones that will overwinter in debris on the ground, leaves, stuff like that. And so they also like to have the shade of the plant. So if you trellis your squashes, then that helps control them because you're exposing sun to them. And again, it goes back to, a lot of things go back to desiccation of insects and how they're very prone to water loss. And so if you expose sun to the plant's gonna be happy because, ooh, sun. But then also, the squash bugs are gonna have a harder time. That's where you'll often see, if you go out to your garden, you have kind of squashes going everywhere, pick up a leaf off the ground or something, you'll just see a mass of squash bugs. Or at least I did back up in Indiana. And also they're common here as well. And so the Colorado potato beetle. And so when I say super pest, it means that they are probably one of the largest issues in terms of being resistant to insecticides. And so they were a pest that they, the 1900s, it was over in, I think, Kansas. So I'm not sure how Colorado came into it, but Kansas is where they were first found. And then they would go ahead and spray some insecticides, a lot of it, and they'd be like, all right, it's fine. But then the insects, because every time they reproduce, if you're using insecticides on insects, you'll go ahead and maybe kill 90% of the population. But then that 10% that was left over are resistant to insecticides. And so then they breed and they start producing, and then eventually it gets to where most of the population is resistant to an insecticide. And so then you're like, oh no, we can't control them. And so that's where making sure not to use too much of one thing is great. Having a diverse set of tools in your toolbox to go ahead and handle it. And so Colorado potato beetle was one of the first super pests where they were found to be resistant to a lot of different insecticides. And so a great way to control them, with pesticides, there are two different forms, and I know that we're also trying to do organic, but in general, there's the generic ones that you can give, anyone can, and then there's the restricted, which you have to be certified to use. And there are no general pesticides that are really successful at controlling the Colorado potato beetle. So that's one where just hand pick them, and that's probably going to be one of your best methods to hold them off. Cabbage loopers, and so these are the ones that if you've grown any cabbages, you'll see all kinds of little green caterpillars crawling all over it and eating it crazily, very fast. And so one way to help control that is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, I believe. And try to say that a few times fast. And so what it is it will it is a type of soil bacteria that when they ingest, if you spray it on the plant and the cabbage looper ingests the plant, then it'll go into their gut and start to crystallize, and then start rupturing their stomach and killing them that way. And so that's one where it is a natural pesticide or form pest control. And so this is one where if you have cabbage worms or cabbage loopers, spraying some BT on it is great. You need to think about if it rains, you're gonna wash all that BT off and then it's no good. So having a few applications throughout, or if it's gonna rain, wait a second until the plant dries and then spray it. And so this is one where, so there's a little bit into pests. And again, that's one where I could have just a whole hour talking about pests, but I didn't want to. I talked about ag safety today with another group, so I already was the Debbie Downer of the presentation, so I was trying to have at least a few positive things to talk about. But anyways, so looking at integrated pest management, what is that? So that's pretty much a method of, again, if you think back to the Colorado potato beetle story, people started to realize that just spraying all the time, trying to eradicate all pests wasn't great. And so with integrated pest management, it's a method of trying to control pests when you need to, and realizing that you don't always need to. And so that's one where a lot of ag producers use this, but you don't have to think of it in the sense of using chemicals. It's still great to use in an organic sense. And so it then focuses on long-term prevention, and there's a lot of different steps to it, and it doesn't have to be as complicated as all this wording looks. And so, but one of the important parts of IPM is to make sure that you understand pest species. And so that's one where if you understand the ecology of the insect and how they operate, maybe realizing, okay, they overwinter as adults in the mulch. Okay, maybe I need to change what I'm doing, or okay, if I remove some of these weeds, it works better. They will go ahead and have piercing, sucking mouth parts, and so trying to use something like BT may not work well, or maybe it's just that doesn't have a interaction with the species. So understanding your enemy is great, so then you can figure out what tools work the best. And so this is one where it's graph, and I promise it's not scary. All this is there's the economic threshold. So this is generally referred to for ag producers, but it works for us as well. And so this is the pests, and you can see that as it gets farther and farther along in the year, the insects start reproducing and building, and then when they hit this economic threshold, this is the time to start controlling the insect. Because up here is pretty much, if you wait until it gets past this line, then that's when you're starting to have a lot of serious damage, stuff that if you're producing for money, it's going to start affecting your production for selling or for eating at home. And so that's one where with IPM, it's important to look at your garden. I know, again, it's hot, and I know that I'm not a fan of heat. Today was too hot for me, and so I'm gonna have a fun time this summer. But it's important to keep an eye out in your garden and kind of see what's going on and be like, okay, I did see a squash bug this time, but it was one, and so I picked it, but we're going to keep an eye on it. And then as it starts to get higher and higher, there's eventually going to be that economic threshold where then you're going to be like, all right, I need to do something. If I wait any longer, it's just going to go crazy. And that's one where the economic threshold can vary all over the place. Like if you think in an urban pest standpoint, a lot of people, if they see one bed bug, one cockroach, and they're gonna be like, it's too much, no, stop. Or it can be, in a garden where you might be like, all right, well there's a few of, this insect, I can handle it, but now you start to see 5, 10, 15, 20, and you're like, okay, no, it's too high. So that's one we're just kind of thinking about in your garden, looking at for what insects there are, and then knowing when you should treat it. And so with the pest identification, that's one where your extension offices are great, where we can help ID insects. That's one where there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of different species. So it can be challenging, but one thing that might be good to use if you have a smartphone is Google Lens, or there's a lot of different apps that can be ID apps. And so if you just take a picture of it, then they'll go ahead and have a database that they compare the pictures to, and then you might be able to figure out or what the insect is, or help give ideas on like what direction to search for. But also using local resources like the extension office are great as well. And as extension agents, we've probably seen a lot of these insects because there's only so many pests, and so it might be like, all right, yep, that's what this is. And so there's no problem with that. We're a free resource. If you're in the county paying taxes, you're helping fund us. And then, as I was talking about, making sure to go scout your fields, monitor, see, okay, there aren't any pests. Oh, there are some pests. Oh, it's not too bad yet. Oh, it's really bad. And then think about when management is needed, and that's one where it kind of depends on everyone else. You can think about what pest it is and help determine, look at that to help determine when it should be, when too much is too much, but kind of it's dependent on each person. But then that's one where prevention is the best treatment. So if you can go ahead and again do some of these practices of removing habitats, helping prevent it early on is going to make it much less of an issue. And using a combination of tools, that's one where if you rely all on beneficial insects, then it may not be as successful as you hoped it to be. So using a little bit of everything. And then it's important to realize it's okay to make mistakes, or maybe it's just like, well, I tried this experiment, it didn't work well. You don't have to be like, all right, I'm done with gardening for my life. Go ahead and just be like, all right, let's see what other ways we can try. Maybe you just didn't have the right tool that first time. And so here's just talking about some different control methods, from a organic side, using biological enemies, the predatory insects or arachnids, stuff like that. Cultural, if you have healthy plants, your plants are going to be able to withstand pests a lot better than if they're stressed from not having enough water, maybe not enough nutrients, planted too close together, and then having crop rotation, selecting the site. So when I talked about some of the ground pests, the wireworms, the white grubs of like the June beetles or Japanese beetles, if you're planting in what used to be turf grass maybe last year, then it might be an issue for you versus if you've had a garden for 10 years that hasn't had any turf grass. Or go ahead and rotate your crops. And so that's one where if you have tomatoes in the same place every year, then every pest to tomatoes are like, all right, I know where I'm going each year. This is going to be my food source. But if you start rotating it around, then you just make it a little bit more challenging for them. And then thinking about using solarization. And so if you go ahead and put plastic down, maybe at end of the year, early in the year, and solarize the soil, then what you're doing is you're drying out the soil, and it goes back to having where insects are prone to desiccating. And so if you make it harder for them to grow in the soil and thrive in there, then you might have a more successful year. And then think about time plantings and harvest. And so I talked about knowing the ecology of the insects, their life cycles. And so that's one where maybe the insects, if you realize, all right, so they generally come out this time of year, July or whatever. If I harvest a little bit early, then I might miss that, and then you don't have to worry about the pests as much. So knowing when, and so that's both for harvest, or maybe if you plant a little bit later, a little bit earlier, you might kind of miss those windows of opportunity for the pests to affect your plants. And then, again, just cleaning up around. If you have a lot of habitat areas, you're going to be exposed to a lot more pests. And then some mechanical and physical ones, if you have mulches down, that may be a deterrent for pests if you kind of block it so they can't get through as easily, or a netting. And so it's one of the great ways where if you just kind of help prevent the insects from reaching the plants, then they can't be a pest to you. That's one where it's not a big deal. And then some chemical ones. And there's a lot of different ones, and it really depends on what pest you're working with, because no one pest is the same. And so there's not a magic bullet. You have to use kind of a little bit of everything. But some ideas are some microbials like BT. There's also some botanical insecticides like pyrethrum. And these are ones where it just really depends on first knowing your what insect you have, so then you can then tailor your control methods like organic pesticides. And then some insecticidal soaps ones, so those that would be great for aphids, whiteflies, that kind of help wash them off. And then also, they will suffocate the insects. So with insects, when we breathe, we have a muscle that helps us breathe. Insects, they don't have the muscle there. What they do is it's diffusing. So they just have what's called spiracles, or pretty much holes, which then air just diffuses in. And so if you cover the insects in oils, then they're going to have a harder time breathing, and then you can, that's one way to control insects. All right, so now I've said a lot of stuff. Going to jump a little bit into periodical cicadas as the last bit here. And so periodical cicadas are a pretty cool insect. They are unique to North America, and they actually, in North America, have they're the longest developmental period of any insect, which they can be 13 to 17 years. And so the brood X, which is coming out now, or around now, depending on where you are, is a 17-year cicada. And so here's some pictures of them. So you can see that these are the form that overwinters underground. If you've dug in a garden around trees, you'll probably see some of these, because while they're underground, they will attach to tree roots and feed on the moisture and juices from the roots. And that's one where a lot of people freak out about that, because if you think about, especially some of these big, which we'll get a picture in a second, these big emergences, you're like, oh, is that hurting my trees? And no, it's not hurting those old trees. That's one where they've done research and found that the trees can handle it just fine. And then here's the adult form down here. When you see them, I always like to call them the Halloween cicada, because they're black with bright orange and then red eyes. And then here you can see a little bit, this is a twig, generally twig about a pencil or smaller, and they'll go ahead, and the females, when they emerge out, they'll be here, and then they'll go ahead and go up to some place and start going through a molt, where they'll come out of that shell, that exoskeleton, and then go ahead and turn into this. And then after that, that's where they'll go ahead and mate. And then the females will go to the twigs, and on their ovipositor, which is the same female organ with wasps and bees that sting, and here it's designed to be able to make little slits in the twigs where they lay their eggs. And so that's one where they don't cause damage to large trees. After a large emergence, you might be able to go out and see natural pruning, where some of those twigs die back. If you have some smaller fruit trees, 3 to 4 years, and then that's one where you may want to net them. They can, if they're 3 to 4 years or younger, then they can do some damage to those. So here's a picture of emergence of some cicadas. You can see it just going crazy over there. Here's more. And so that's one where they, as I said, overwinter underground, and then due to a mechanism that we don't quite know why, they'll just 17 years, 13 years later, come on out all as group, and then mates, lay eggs, and then become wildlife food. So different years of broods, and so brood X is emerging this year, and it's really hard to see with this projector, but Scott County is on the edge of brood X, and so that's one. Fentress and Morgan don't have it, but Morgan does. Fentress and Pickett, they don't have any recordings from the last time they came out in 2004, but then Cumberland, going down to like Knox in that area. So that's where it's expected to have a large one. Scott County may or may not like have a lot. We're on the edge. In my backyard last night, I saw one cicada came out. The husk, their exoskeleton after they got out and turned into what you think of when you think of cicada. But also, they don't emerge until the soil is warmed to a certain temperature for so many days. I believe it's between 64 and 67 degrees for about 4-day period. And so that's one where, as we're having warmer temperatures, we may see more emerge. And so then brood X, which is what's happening this year, they have the largest emergence of 17 years. If you look forward to, I forgot which brood it was, but in 2025, that's one where Scott County is going to have a big emergence of periodical cicadas. So it's really cool to watch. If you're planting fruit trees, maybe don't plant in 2025. That's one where a lot of people will say, oh, you know, the locusts are coming. And so that's one of the examples of how common names can be lead to misinformation. And so cicadas and locusts are different. Cicadas are in, I don't think, you have to be careful with saying orders because they're constantly changing orders as they use genetics more. But I believe cicadas are still in Homoptera. I don't know if they've gotten rid of that one. But anyways, they're in a different order than locusts, which is Orthoptera. And so locusts are your grasshoppers, and that's one where if you think back to Bible stories and the biblical plagues, or if you go over looking like what is it, like Eastern Africa to the Middle East, there's the swarms of locusts. I think recently within the last few years there's been some locust events over there, and I believe that actually with climate change they're predicting that it's going to become more common because there's more moisture and stuff. But side tangent as I was reading on things. But locusts and cicadas aren't the same. So that's one where settlers came over from Europe. Since periodical cicadas were unique to North America, they saw that, and the only thing that they had experience of was locusts. They're like, oh, it's locusts, and then the name stuck. And so that's why. But they will not eat your crops, but as I said, having some young trees may get damaged, and that's where the cicadas aren't eating on the trees. What they're doing is making the slits and laying eggs in it. And then that's one where it's interesting to read into some of the history of cicadas. A lot of different cultures, from like Native Americans, they would go ahead and see cicadas as bad omens because they come out in just these big, large numbers. But they aren't bad. Again, unless if you have some young trees, what you can do is put netting over them. And again, it's just one of those trying to exclude them from being able to have access to your tree. But they're great for the environment because you now have all these little protein packets running around, and that's where birds and mammals and everything else are going out and being like, this is great. I don't have to, put my neck out on the line to go find food. There's hundreds of, thousands of insects flying all around. I can just fill myself. And then I'll go ahead and end it on here. If you're interested in having some citizen science helping out in universities, there's this app called the Cicada Safari. And so what this is it helps researchers determine when cicadas are emerging in different parts of the state. And so it's both cool for helping out researchers because that's one where if you see a cicada in your backyard, you can just snap a picture and then it will put it into a map, which then you can see. And you can also look to see if you want to find emergencies, if you're nerdy like I am, then you can use the map to then help determine, all right, this county, this area, there's a lot of emergencies. I'm going to jump in the car and go hunting for cicadas. But it's a really cool opportunity to help out as we have more technology to help have a better understanding of emergencies. So then in the future, for the next 17 years, we may have a better map to indicate, all right, there's going to be a large emergencies here versus not here. But yeah, this goes into some references on stuff. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer some. That's one where I know with talking about insects, it was a little bit daunting trying to figure out what to talk about because, it's just like, I guess, everything. You can go ahead and just be like, oh, I can spend a whole hour on this. I can spend a whole hour on this. But yeah.
You said wasps and hornets eat other insects. Do they eat beneficials?
They can eat pests. There are ones where they can do both. A lot of, due to the fact that a lot of people see a wasp and go, ooh, generally they're not considered beneficial, but they are. And so that kind of goes into, as you talk about, especially with weeds, like plants that are weeds, it's kind of subjective.
Because we have a lot of the red, which, could care less.
Yeah.
We had a ginormous one that we actually were able to capture in the window, between the window and the screen, and took a picture. And it was a European?
European hornet, yeah. And they'll go ahead and they'll actually have social nests in tree cavities, generally.
That was nasty. That was huge.
Yeah, that's one where they're huge, but that's one where generally it's kind of one of those like huge seems bad to us, but it generally means that it's kind of like a, I don't know, and not to offend anyone with small dogs, but if you think about dogs, it's generally the big ones that are fine. It's the small ones that have a little bit of attitude, and that I don't know, not necessarily research to back that up, but that seems to be kind of one of those ones where European hornets, you have to try pretty hard to mess with them. If you are going around since I said they're social insects like honeybees, if you go around their nest, they might be pretty protective, but if you're around them otherwise, it's, I don't know, if you smack them, they're going to sting you, but.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out how it got in my house. It ain't getting out of that window. It's gonna die first. It ain't coming in my house.
Oh, yeah, no, that kind of goes back to IPM, where, if your economic threshold is 0 European hornets in the house.
That's right.
And so, but yeah, that's one where I had one in the garage recently, that my own has, and I was trying to figure out how to get it out, and I didn't want to, that's one where if you don't, mess with it, it's fine, but if you start, messing with it, then they may get kind of defensive. And so, if it's trapped in there, you can probably just go ahead and, if it doesn't bother you, leave the window closed. Then that might be the simplest way, just kind of,
I'm gonna get some compressed air and freeze it and then
Yeah.
remove it that way.
there you go.
But you said also about bees being thirsty.
Yeah.
We put out a plate, a bowl.
That's one where there's all kinds of different methods. Really, probably the best thing is if you can put some rocks in with it. So pretty much, if you just put a bowl of water out, then it's going to be very deep for the insects and they may get stuck in the water. But if you have a lot of little rocks in there, then they'll have a lot of areas to stand while accessing the water.
Okay.
So that could be a plate, a bowl, a water, like a bird bath.
There was a big, like, bumblebee looking thing that when I was pulling water from the well, it just kept coming down and looking at me and then it would fly off and then I think it was thirsty.
It may have been thirsty, especially depending on the time of year where, it's spring, there might be a lot of moisture, but.
It was just today, so.
Yeah, well, then that's one where we, finally for a little bit haven't had torrential rains every 5 minutes. And so that may have been the case. And so just a thing to think about that is other insects like mosquitoes like water, so replacing the water. If you go ahead and do that, flush it out every once in a while would be a good practice. Any other questions? That's one where if you don't have questions now, but if you think of them later, then again, calling your local extension office, depending on if you're here in Tennessee and Scott County, me, or talking to Tracy if you're up in Kentucky. And that's one where we're a great resource. Like I said, without even knowing about it, you're helping fund us, and so might as well get your money's worth.
I also want to add, if anyone in McCreary County happens to see a periodical cicada, please let me know, because I'm interested / excited to see how many of those we get in McCreary. Probably won't be a lot, but.
I had some a long time ago in Pine Knot.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I didn't know what they were. I thought they were big flies, but when it looked like to me, they were big.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's one where as you start to go into learning more about insects, then you're going to just realize like, oh wow, like the diverse world there. And it's kind of like having a truck. Once you start telling people that you know about insects, everyone's going to be like, what is this insect? So I guess there's a little warning, yeah. But no, it's great. And that's one where, like I said, there's another brood, again, I forgot which one. It's Roman numerals, and I'm horrible with Roman numerals. I think it might be brood 14, but in 2025 is when they'll emerge. And that'll probably include Kentucky, because Scott County will be smack dab in it. And that's one where I can send out some maps of cicadas if people are interested, or you can go ahead and contact me. I know that probably not everyone's interested in that like I am.
Okay, so speaking of cicadas, you said 4-year-old trees are susceptible and younger?
Yeah, so pretty much what you're thinking about is the cicadas like to have twigs that are about pencil size or less. And so the younger trees, if say like there's a huge emergence and a lot of the small twigs are taken like naturally pruned pretty much, that's what happens where they'll get damaged and die off, then the younger trees can't handle that. But as you start to get older and older trees, then they can handle some of that pruning when female cicadas will go ahead and lay their eggs and kill the outer twigs.
So planting fruit trees is best after the cicadas are done this year before 2025.
Yeah, that's one where I guess there's so many different broods of cicadas. I think 2025 is the next one. If you can line it up, that's great. If not, having some exclusion of putting nets up. There's no chemicals or anything. It doesn't do anything. So again, I know that this is an organic group, but exclusion is the best method if you have a tree and emergence is coming. But as also fruit trees take a long time to grow, so we're not going to be like, all right, we'll wait until this perfect window. Because sometimes it's better to put it out and then.
Is it only fruit trees, or would like the red buds be affected as well?
It can be more than fruit trees. Like younger trees, they will lay eggs in a lot of different species. Well, that's one where, as I said, Scott County is on that outer edge of the map, and it was 17 years ago where technology wasn't quite the same in 2004, and so these maps, they didn't have as much information as they hoped to have this time, so that they can help narrow down where these emergencies are in the hot spots. And so that's one where Scott County's in the map, but we're on the edge of the map, and so we'll see periodical cicadas, but it won't. It may not be those instances where so many are coming out that people are like, oh, there's an earthquake because they're shaking the ground, or they're kind of rippling as they're moving around. So may or may not have to worry about that. Because that's one where if we have a small emergence here, then you may not have to worry so much about it, because normally if you think about it, go back to this, if every tree looks like this, then there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these cicadas coming out.
Yeah.
And so every twig is going to be hit, or a lot of the twigs are. But if there's only a handful coming out here and there, then it may not be as devastating for the trees. So that's one where if you use Android or Apple or a smartphone and download Cicada Safari, then you can also use that as for your own benefit to help see, all right, there's a lot of emergencies happening here. Oh, okay. That there's not too many. Oh, that was a fluke kind of thing. And so that might be a good resource to have as you're thinking about whether your trees should be protected or not. If in doubt, go ahead and put a net out. I guess I kind of rhymed. But anyways, because it's not going to hurt the tree, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Because with fruit trees, that's one where you're putting or other young trees, it takes a long time for things to grow, and it'd be pretty devastating if you lost it. So, but again, that's one where Scott County's on the edge, and so we'll probably see some, but wouldn't be too worried about it. Then also with the periodical cicada, I'll say, you can see from this picture here a green cicada, kind of like army camouflage, and so that there are annual cicadas. So those are ones where they have a brood of, like, they stay underground for about 3 to 4 years, but there's so many different broods that there's some that come out every year. So that's where you're like, wait, but I've seen cicadas, the past 17 years, but they're only emerging now. What's up? It's because there's the annual cicadas that'll come out each year. Well, hope those. Oh yeah.
The cicadas have lived, does it kind of get a green over here?
Yeah, and so that's one where here, like, it's really hard to see, but yeah, they have just some. Their bodies, their wings are much larger than their bodies, and so there's kind of like a half green, half brown, or so.
Okay, I saw one.
Oh yeah, that's cool. That's one. Yeah, so they're also going to be emerging about the same time, and so they also will be underground, and those are ones where you don't really have to worry about them because they aren't emerging in the large populations, and so it's a big thing where don't freak out and see, oh, a cicada, I'm going to kill it. They're fine. They're doing their own thing. They may keep you up at night if they're droning too much, but otherwise. Get some earplugs. Perfect. Well, if you have any other questions, like I said, go ahead and you can contact me or contact Tracy if you're Tennessee, Kentucky, and that's a great way. Also, a really cool trick before I hand it back over. If you're searching stuff on Google, and if you think about Google, there's a lot of stuff that you can find, but only a little bit of it's actually useful. There might be a lot of blog posts of, oh, you know, I'm Joe Schmo out here gardening, and you should use this to, you know, control this pest or this. Here's this insect, but it's not one where there's not the backing up of research and a lot of information on it. It's just one of those. They may lead you down the wrong way. They may tell you to, I don't know, go put gasoline on there to kill it, or something like really crazy. And so instead, if you're trying to find some research-based information, like in universities, a really cool way to find this is go ahead and put your search term into Google, and then afterwards put in sites, SITE, :edu. And what that is it's telling Google to only search for sites that end in .edu. And so then you'll only find university information, and then it'll be research-based and worth reading. As one where the blogs may be interesting to read, but don't, as one where, and take it with a grain of salt when it comes to information. That may or may not be beneficial. But yeah, if you use that little bit of trick, then you can go ahead and make sure you're actually finding some information that's going to help you out versus make it worse or not help you at all. All right, well, I'll stop rambling and I'll pass it back on.
All right, guys, did everybody turn in their harvest sheet and get a ticket?